You have 3 weeks to get married, or you lose everything. The words hit Thomas Harrison like a physical blow, nearly causing him to drop his $5,000 scotch on the imported Persian carpet of his mother's study. Outside the frost-covered windows of their Manhattan mansion, snow was beginning to fall. But inside, the temperature had dropped to Arctic levels. "Have you lost your mind?" Thomas stared at his mother, Caroline Harrison, who sat behind his late father's mahogany desk like a queen on her throne. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair and Chanel suit projected the same ruthless authority that had made her one of Wall Street's most feared CEOs. "I assure you I'm perfectly sane," Caroline replied, her voice as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "The board meeting is in 1 hour. Either I announce your engagement and upcoming Christmas wedding, or I name your cousin Richard as the next CEO of Harrison International." Thomas's glass shattered against the wall before he even realized he'd thrown it. $40,000 of Macallan wasted, Caroline noted dryly, not even flinching. "Your temper tantrums were tedious when you were 5, Thomas. They're unforgivable at 32. This is blackmail," he snarled, his hands shaking with rage. Richard, the same cousin who'd lost $50 million in a failed venture last year, who'd been trying to destroy Thomas's career since they were children. "You'd rather hand over Dad's legacy to that snake than let me live my life." "Your life?" Caroline's laugh was as cold as the winter wind howling outside. "You mean your parade of supermodels and socialites, the tabloid headlines, the embarrassing scandals? Your father built this company from nothing, and I won't watch you destroy it with your inability to grow up." She stood, smoothing her skirt with manicured hands that had never known a day of manual labor. 3 weeks, Thomas. Find someone appropriate, someone with breeding, education and class, someone who understands our world. Or watch everything you've worked for go to Richard. And if I refuse, Thomas's voice was dangerous, quiet, then you lose it all. Not just the CEO position, everything. The trust fund, the apartments, the cars. Your father's will gave me that power. Remember? I've indulged your playboy lifestyle long enough. It's time for you to become who you were born to be. Thomas turned to leave, his mind racing with fury and desperation, but his mother's voice stopped him at the door. "Oh, and Thomas? Make sure she's someone convincing. The board knows your reputation. If they suspect this is a sham marriage, they'll back Richard in a heartbeat." The next hour passed in a blur of anger and disbelief. Thomas found himself walking through the bitter December wind, too furious to get in his Bentley, too proud to let his driver see him unraveling. Fifth Avenue glittered with Christmas decorations, but they seemed to mock him now. 3 weeks to find a wife, 3 weeks to save everything he'd worked for. He was so lost in his rage that he almost didn't see her. A young woman in worn but clean clothes, sitting on the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral, sketching in a tattered notebook. What caught his eye wasn't her obvious poverty. Manhattan was full of homeless people, but the intense focus on her face as she worked, completely oblivious to the expensive crowds flowing past her. A gust of wind caught one of her pages, sending it cartwheeling toward him. He caught it reflexively, and what he saw made him stop dead in his tracks. The sketch showed the cathedral, but not just its physical form. Somehow, she'd captured its soul. The way light fell through the Gothic windows, the play of shadows on ancient stone, the sense of history and solitude. It was the work of someone with extraordinary talent. "Excuse me," he called out, an idea forming in his mind that was either brilliant or insane. "I think this is yours." She looked up, and Thomas felt the world shift. Her face was smudged with charcoal, but beneath the dirt she was striking, not in the artificial way of the women he usually dated, but with a natural grace that seemed to radiate from within. Her eyes were a startling shade of green, intelligent and wary. "Thank you," she said, quickly taking the sketch and tucking it away. Her voice shocked him, educated, elegant, with a slight accent he couldn't place. Most people would have just let it blow away. Most people wouldn't recognize talent when they see it, Thomas replied, his mother's ultimatum echoing in his head. "I'm Thomas." She hesitated, studying him with those remarkable eyes. "Sarah," she finally said, "Sarah Chen." And in that moment, as the cathedral bells began to toll and snow swirled around them like dancing ghosts, Thomas Harrison had what was either the worst idea of his life or the beginning of something extraordinary. Will Sarah accept this desperate proposal? Stay until the end to discover how this unexpected encounter will change both their lives forever. "Let me buy you a coffee," Thomas said, watching snowflakes settle on Sarah's dark hair. "You must be freezing out here." Sarah's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I don't need charity, Mr. Harrison," he supplied, then immediately regretted it when he saw the flash of recognition in her eyes. Everyone in New York knew the Harrison name. "And it's not charity. Consider it payment for letting me see your art." To his surprise, she laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to cut through the winter chill. "Payment for a wind-blown sketch? That's the most creative pickup line I've heard this week." "You get many. You'd be surprised." She began packing up her supplies with practiced efficiency. The cathedral steps attract an interesting crowd. Yesterday, a hedge fund manager offered to rescue me with a luxury apartment. The day before, a tech CEO wanted to invest in my future. In his bed, Thomas winced. "I promise my intentions are more boring. Just coffee. There's a place around the corner that makes decent espresso." Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Decent espresso sounds better than frozen fingers. Lead the way, Mr. Harrison." The cafe was small and warm, tucked away from the tourist crowds. Thomas watched as Sarah ordered in perfect Italian, surprising both him and the barista. She caught his expression and smiled. "What? Homeless people can't speak Italian? I'm beginning to think you're full of surprises." He led them to a corner table. "How does someone who speaks Italian and draws like a master end up on cathedral steps?" Sarah's smile faded. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, seeming to draw warmth from it. "Life happens. Sometimes it happens all at once. And before you know it, you're not who you used to be anymore." "And who were you?" "A graduate student at Columbia. Art history and restoration. I was..." She paused, pain flickering across her face. "I was going to help preserve beautiful things. Instead, I ended up drawing them from cathedral steps." Thomas leaned forward. "What happened?" "The short version? My father worked for an investment bank in Singapore. He was involved in something illegal. When it all came crashing down, he went to prison, and every asset we had was seized. My student visa was revoked because I couldn't pay tuition. I couldn't go back to Singapore. The shame would have killed my mother. So I stayed, tried to make it work." She shrugged. But Thomas could see the tension in her shoulders. "Turns out New York is expensive. Why not find a job? Without a visa, the best I could get was under-the-table work at restaurants. It covered food, sometimes a hostel bed. The rest," she gestured to her worn clothes. "Well, you can see how that worked out." Thomas felt something twist in his chest. Here was someone who understood loss, who knew what it meant to have everything stripped away. Before he could stop himself, he heard his own voice saying, "I have a proposition for you." Sarah's expression instantly closed off. "I told you, I'm not interested in marriage," Thomas cut in, then watched as her eyes widened in shock. "I need a wife. You need a fresh start. We could help each other." "Are you insane?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Probably." Thomas leaned forward, lowering his voice. "My mother has given me 3 weeks to get married, or I lose everything. My position, my inheritance, everything my father built. I need someone intelligent, educated, someone who can convince the board of directors that this is real. And you think a homeless girl you just met fits that description? I think you're the most intriguing person I've met in years." He pulled out his business card, wrote his private number on the back. "You speak multiple languages, understand art and culture, and clearly have the grace and intelligence to move in any circle. With the right clothes and story, you could be anyone." Sarah stared at the card, then back at him. "This is crazy. This is survival," Thomas corrected. "For both of us. 3 months, that's all I'm asking. Play the part, help me secure my position, and in return you get financial security, a visa, and a fresh start. After 3 months, we get a quiet divorce and you walk away with enough money to finish your degree and start over. And if I refuse, then I walk out that door and we both go back to our problems. But Sarah, he held her gaze. When was the last time life offered you a second chance? Sarah was silent for a long moment, turning the business card over in her hands. Finally, she looked up, and Thomas saw something new in her eyes. Not just desperation, but a fierce kind of determination. 3 conditions, she said, her voice steady. First, everything is in writing. The terms, the payment, everything. Second, I want enough money in an escrow account before the wedding to ensure you can't back out of our deal. And third, she paused, I want to finish my degree. During our marriage, no playing house, no public appearances unless absolutely necessary. I've lost too much time already. Thomas felt a smile spread across his face. I think we can arrange that. One more thing, Sarah added, her green eyes intense. Your mother, the board. They'll investigate me. What makes you think I can fool them? Thomas's smile widened. Because you already fooled me. You're not just some homeless girl, are you? The way you carry yourself, your knowledge of art and language, you're from money, old money. Your father's scandal didn't just destroy his life, it destroyed your family's legacy. Sarah's sharp intake of breath told him he'd hit the mark. How did you? I grew up in that world. I know what it looks like when someone's learned culture from birth, not books. He leaned back, feeling more confident by the second. Your father's name wasn't really Chen, was it? No, she whispered. We changed it after everything, to avoid the publicity. Then we have our story. You're not running from poverty. You're running from scandal. Just like my mother's generation would understand. Just like the board would sympathize with. Thomas pulled out his phone. Now let's get you somewhere warm. I know a hotel that doesn't ask questions. And tomorrow we can start building our beautiful lie. As they stepped back into the snowy evening, Thomas felt a strange mix of triumph and unease. He'd found his solution, but why did it feel like he was the one walking into a trap? Little did he know, as Sarah walked beside him through the falling snow, that his instincts were right. Because Sarah Chen was indeed hiding something that would shake the Harrison Empire to its foundations. What is Sarah really hiding? Drop her if you think Thomas is walking into a trap. The transformation was remarkable. Just 5 days after their meeting at the cathedral, Sarah Chen stood in the mirror of Manhattan's most exclusive bridal boutique, looking every inch the society bride. The designer gown hugged her figure perfectly, its elegant simplicity highlighting her natural grace. $200,000 of borrowed Harry Winston diamonds glittered at her throat. You clean up well, Thomas said, watching her from the doorway. It was meant to sound casual, but his voice caught slightly. Sarah met his eyes in the mirror. Amazing what money can buy, isn't it? But there was something bitter in her tone, something that made Thomas wonder what memories were playing behind those green eyes. The past 5 days had been a whirlwind of preparations. Thomas had installed Sarah in a suite at the Four Seasons, arranged for a complete wardrobe, and started the process of creating their cover story. But something was off. Sometimes he'd catch her on the phone, speaking in rapid-fire Mandarin, cutting off quickly when she noticed him. Other times, she'd ask surprisingly detailed questions about Harrison International's structure and operations. The board meeting is tomorrow, Thomas said, checking his watch. Mother's already suspicious about why I won't let her meet you before then. Good. Sarah turned from the mirror, the diamonds catching the light. Let her be suspicious. It adds credibility. The more she thinks you're trying to hide me, the more she'll want to prove herself right about me being wrong for you. And when she discovers instead that I'm exactly what you need, you've thought this through. I've had practice playing roles, Thomas. She stepped closer, and he caught the scent of her perfume, something expensive he'd bought her. But on her, it smelled different, intoxicating. Your mother isn't the first powerful person I've had to convince of something. Before he could question that cryptic statement, his phone buzzed. A message from his private investigator. Urgent. Information about Sarah Chen. Call immediately. "Excuse me," he said, stepping out into the boutique's hallway. His heart was pounding as he dialed. "Mr. Harrison," the PI's voice was tense. "We found something. The Chen family scandal in Singapore. It goes deeper than we thought. Your fiancé's father wasn't just involved in fraud. He was working with a group that was systematically targeting major financial institutions. And there's evidence that his daughter was—" The call cut off abruptly. Thomas stared at his phone, then looked back through the doorway where Sarah was still admiring the dress. She caught his eye in the mirror again and smiled, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. His phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, Mr. Harrison. Some questions are better left unasked." Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December cold. What had he gotten himself into? The next morning, the Harrison International boardroom was thick with tension. Thomas sat at his father's old seat, watching his mother's face as Sarah made her entrance. Caroline Harrison's expression was a study in careful neutrality, but Thomas caught the slight widening of her eyes, the almost imperceptible straightening of her spine. Sarah moved through the room like she'd been born to it, greeting board members by name, making small talk about mutual acquaintances in Singapore's financial circle that Thomas hadn't even known she was aware of. Her accent had shifted subtly, becoming the cultured tones of Southeast Asian old money. "Ms. Chen," Caroline finally said, her voice arctic. "Or should I say, the former Miss Lim?" "Yes," she added, noting Sarah's carefully controlled surprise. "I did my research. Your father's scandal caused quite a stir in certain circles." "Mother," Thomas started, but Sarah laid a gentle hand on his arm. "It's all right, Thomas." Sarah met Caroline's gaze steadily. "Yes, Mrs. Harrison, my father was Edward Lim, and yes, his actions destroyed our family name. I changed my name to Chen, my mother's maiden name, to escape the publicity, to make my own way, and instead you found my son." Caroline's smile was razor-sharp. "How convenient." "I found peace, Mrs. Harrison," Sarah corrected softly. "Working at the cathedral, sketching, I found something money can't buy. And then I found love. Whether you believe that or not is your choice." The board members were watching the exchange like a tennis match. Thomas could see some of them nodding approvingly at Sarah's composure. "And the fact that Thomas is about to become CEO of one of the largest financial institutions in America had nothing to do with your peace." Caroline's voice dripped sarcasm. Sarah's laugh was light, musical. "Mrs. Harrison, I grew up in a world of CEOs and corporate takeovers. If I wanted to marry for money, I had plenty of opportunities in Singapore. I chose Thomas because he saw me when I was at my lowest and still treated me like a person of worth, something I think his father would have appreciated." The mention of Thomas's father landed like a bomb in the room. Caroline's face went white. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, remembering William Harrison's famous dedication to charitable causes, something his widow had largely abandoned after his death. "Well," said George Peterson, the board's senior member, "I for one am impressed. The Harrison name needs someone with both grace and steel. Welcome to the family, my dear." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of congratulations and wedding planning, but Thomas barely heard any of it. His mind was racing, piecing together all the small inconsistencies he'd noticed. Sarah's detailed knowledge of the board members, her perfectly crafted responses, the way she'd mentioned his father. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, Thomas finally allowed himself to voice the question that had been haunting him. What if Sarah wasn't running from her father's scandal? What if she was finishing what he'd started? His phone buzzed again, another text from the unknown number. "Getting warmer, Mr. Harrison, but it's too late now, isn't it?" Thomas walked to his window, staring out at the snow-covered city. In less than 2 weeks, he would marry Sarah Chen, or whatever her real name was. And somehow he suspected that marriage would either be his salvation or his complete destruction. Because Sarah wasn't just playing a role anymore. She was playing a much more dangerous game. And Thomas was beginning to realize he might not be the player he thought he was. He might be the prize. Who is Sarah Chen, really? Comment if you've already figured out her true intentions. The week before Christmas in New York was usually Thomas Harrison's favorite time of year. But now, standing in his office overlooking a snow-covered Central Park, he felt only dread. In 4 days, he would marry Sarah Chen, a woman he was increasingly certain was planning to destroy him. His computer screen glowed with the results of his latest investigation. After his PI's mysterious disconnection, Thomas had hired 3 more, all working independently. Their findings painted a disturbing picture, but it was like assembling a puzzle with crucial pieces missing. Edward Lim's financial scandal had nearly collapsed Singapore's banking system 5 years ago. The official story was simple. A rogue banker's illegal schemes exposed and punished, but buried beneath layers of classified documents and sealed court records, Thomas's investigators had found something else. References to a larger conspiracy, missing millions that were never recovered, and most disturbing of all, evidence that Lim had been working with someone inside Harrison International. A soft knock at his door made him quickly close the files. Sarah stood there, a vision in cream cashmere and pearls. Sometimes it was hard to believe this elegant woman was the same person he'd met on the cathedral steps. "Your mother's Christmas gala starts in an hour," she reminded him. "We should go." Thomas studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. "You know what's strange? I've had teams investigating you for days, and they still can't find any pictures of you with your father from Singapore. Not one photo of Sarah Chen or Sarah Lim at any society event. Is that why you've been so distant?" Sarah stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. "You think I'm lying about who I am? Are you?" Sarah walked to the window, watching the snow fall. "Do you know what it's like, Thomas, to lose everything? Not just money and status, but your entire identity? When my father's scandal broke, we didn't just change our names. We erased our existence, every photo, every record, every trace of who we were, gone. Why? Protection, they said. From the people he'd wronged, from the truth." She turned to face him, and for a moment, he saw real pain in her eyes. "Do you want to know the truth, Thomas? The real reason I agreed to this marriage?" Thomas's heart pounded. "Tell me." "Your father," she began, but was interrupted by a commotion in the outer office. Suddenly, the door burst open. Caroline Harrison stood there, her face white with fury, clutching a file. "You fools!" she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Before either could respond, security guards filled the room. Thomas recognized them, not Harrison International's regular security, but a private team his mother sometimes used for sensitive matters. "Take her," Caroline ordered, pointing at Sarah. "Mother, what are you doing?" Thomas moved to intervene, but 2 guards blocked his path. "Protecting you, as I've always done." Caroline threw the file on his desk. "Your little gold digger isn't just a con artist, she's a terrorist. Or have you forgotten what happened to your father?" The world seemed to stop. Thomas stared at his mother, then at Sarah, who hadn't moved or shown any reaction to the guards approaching her. "What does she mean?" Thomas asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What does my father have to do with this?" "Show him," Caroline commanded one of the guards, who produced a laptop. Security footage began playing, grainy video from what looked like a parking garage. Thomas recognized his father walking to his car 5 years ago, the day he died. The official story was a heart attack, but the video showed something else. A figure approaching William Harrison, a conversation, his father clutching his chest, the figure calmly walking away as William collapsed. "We enhanced the footage," Caroline said coldly. "The person your father was meeting, Edward Lim, the man who nearly destroyed Singapore's financial system, the man who was working with a network of financial terrorists targeting major institutions. And now his daughter is about to marry my son." Thomas turned to Sarah, expecting denial, shock, anything. Instead, she was smiling, a cold, empty smile that transformed her entire face. "You made one mistake, Caroline," Sarah said, her voice completely changed. "You assumed I was working with my father." She reached into her purse slowly, causing the guards to tense. but she only withdrew a USB drive. I was working against him, just like your husband was. Caroline's composure cracked. Oh, what? William Harrison wasn't a victim of my father's schemes. He was helping me expose them. That meeting in the garage? He was giving me evidence, proof that someone high in Harrison International was the real power behind the financial attacks, someone who'd been using my father as a puppet. Sarah's eyes locked onto Caroline. Someone who couldn't risk being exposed, someone who arranged for both my father and William Harrison to be silenced. Isn't that right, mother-in-law? The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas felt the floor sway beneath his feet as the implications hit him. Mother? Caroline's laugh was brittle. You expect anyone to believe this fantasy? You have no proof. The proof is on this drive, Sarah said calmly. Everything William Harrison collected. Bank records, secret accounts, communications. He gave it to me minutes before he died, not from a heart attack, but from a carefully administered poison. The same poison found in my father's prison food 2 weeks later. Thomas watched his mother's face, hoping to see denial, outrage, anything to disprove Sarah's accusations. Instead, he saw something he'd never seen before. Fear. Why? He asked Sarah. Why this elaborate scheme? Why not just expose her? Because proof isn't enough, Sarah replied, never taking her eyes off Caroline. I needed to understand why. Why destroy so many lives? Why kill your own husband? And most importantly, I needed to know if the son was like the mother. I did what I had to do. Caroline suddenly snapped. William was weak. He wanted to clean up the company, expose our most profitable operations. He would have destroyed everything we built. You mean everything you stole, Sarah corrected. The millions siphoned from failing banks, the investments in criminal enterprises, the network of shell companies hiding dirty money from around the world. And now what? Caroline's voice was ice. You expose me, destroy the company, ruin your fiancé's future? Some revenge? No, Sarah said softly. Now Thomas decides. She held out the USB drive to him. Your father died trying to make things right. The question is, what will you do? Thomas stared at the drive, feeling the weight of his father's legacy, of years of lies and manipulation. He thought about the kind man who'd taught him about honor and responsibility, who died before they could say goodbye. He thought about his mother, who'd controlled and shaped him his entire life, and he thought about Sarah, the mysterious woman who'd orchestrated this entire scheme, who'd made him fall for her, even while plotting to expose the truth. The next few moments would change everything. The choice he made would determine not just his future, but the fate of his father's company and his mother's freedom. And somewhere in the swirling chaos of revelations and betrayals, he had to decide if the woman he'd begun to love was real at all, or just another carefully crafted lie. Sarah watched him, her green eyes unreadable. Caroline's security team shifted uneasily, waiting for orders, and outside, the snow continued to fall on a city, unaware that inside this tower of glass and steel, a dynasty was about to either crumble or be reborn. Subscribe now to discover tomorrow if Thomas will choose love or loyalty in this shocking finale. Did this story touch your heart? Let us know in the comments. What would you have done in Thomas's position? Chosen truth or protected your family's empire? Was Sarah right to walk away at the end, or should true love have prevailed? If this story moved you, show your support with a like. It helps us share more stories like this that matter. Want to keep feeling these emotions? The next story in your screen is waiting to take you on another unforgettable journey that will touch your heart just as deeply. Trust us, you won't regret pressing play. Your subscription is what keeps these touching stories coming every day. Join our family and never miss another emotional journey that reminds us what truly matters in life.